Next month sees the one-year anniversary of the Hamas attacks on Israel, and since then the horrors of the conflict in Gaza have dominated our news. But for one Irishman, what's going on in Gaza is not just a headline, it's what he's living every day in his role working for the United Nations Palestinian Refugee Agency, UNRWA. Next week, he leaves his family here in Ireland once again to continue his work in one of the most desperate and dangerous places on earth. But tonight, he is here to share his story. Please welcome John Whyte. John, you've been working in Gaza for 10 months. You're heading back there next week. What are you going back to? What's life like in Gaza at the minute?
Well, it's a conflict, I think, where everyone around the world is watching, where it's broadcast 24/7 on social media, so everybody sees what's happening there. And I'm very often asked, is it really like that? And actually it is. What people see is how it is. It's a tough environment. It's an active war, and you have 2.2 million people being increasingly squeezed into an ever smaller piece of land. And our role is to be there to try and give them whatever support we can in terms of food, non-food items, education, when we can, health, other types of social supports and services.
So you started out here with the regeneration of Fatima Mansions, then you went to work with the UN, you were in Lebanon, you were building homes in Lebanon in a refugee camp. Very different from what you're doing in Gaza now. Correct.
So my background working in Ireland in the inner city from around 2003 to 2013, I was the CEO of the Regeneration Board, the Fatima Regeneration Board, which was a pioneering social partnership between this local authority, Dublin City Council, and community voluntary organisations and other statutory agencies, where we basically demolished and rebuilt a deprived local authority flat complex, but also put a lot of effort into social regeneration as well as physical regeneration.
And that was kind of similar to what you were doing in Lebanon, rebuilding a refugee camp, but all bets are off when you're back in Gaza. It's all hands to the pump. How hard is it?
Yeah, I mean, in Lebanon, it was a post-conflict reconstruction of a camp that was destroyed in 2007. And at the time, it was and remains the single largest project ever undertaken by the agency. But we were dealing with maybe 5,000 families, maybe 21,000 people, budget of 345 million, but nothing on the scale of what we're seeing in Gaza. I think I read a statistic recently that if they even tried to remove all the rubble, it would take 100 trucks, 14 years to remove all of the rubble that's been generated so far in the conflict. So you just get an idea of the scale of the devastation and the scale of what lies ahead in terms of trying to rebuild this shattered, community.
You're giving us some of the statistics in Gaza. What's it like when you're trying to do your job? It seems that no one is safe. Are you safe?
It's correct that no one is safe. Of course, we have a team as a UN agency whose job it is to try and manage the risks, try to minimize the danger, try to keep us safe as we go about our work. And they are a fantastic team, and I have to pay a lot of tribute to their behind-the-scenes work, which makes what we do possible on a day-to-day basis. But there can be no illusion that moving around Gaza is safe, is easy, and there are constant changes militarily on the ground. There's evacuation orders. At a moment's notice, we have to be prepared to take everything and just leave, because that's always the possibility, that things can deteriorate very, very quickly. Things change within minutes, and we have to be always prepared.
Whenever you're dealing with both sides, because your agency is dealing with Hamas and you're also dealing with the Israeli government as well, you have to tell them where you're going to be set up.
Yes. Yeah. So we have to coordinate, like as in any UN agency, in any conflict situation, we have to work with all parties to the conflict. That's just a necessity for us to be able to do our job. So we coordinate very closely with the Israeli authorities. All our movements are coordinated or notified. So there's a very strict protocol for actually managing movements so that, they know exactly where we are at any particular point when we're involved in an aid convoy, when we're actually moving or visiting a hospital or visiting one of our shelters. So it's always about trying to minimize so that they know our locations and that, we can be somehow kept safer.
But even when you do that, things go wrong.
Yes, of course, sadly. I think the world is well aware that, many people have lost their lives. Humanitarian is the most dangerous place to be a humanitarian worker. Now 224 UNRWA staff have died in the course of, this conflict, which is the most any UN agency has ever experienced in any field of operations in the history of the UN.
What is that like whenever you've got friends and there are people over there who have loved ones that are being killed and they still have to get up the next day and try to do the job you're doing?
Yeah, I think what is extraordinary for me is the bravery of some of my colleagues, because most of our colleagues are national staff. So we have 13,000 staff there. And we have, at the moment, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 of those getting up every day, coming in to serve their community, because most are teachers and our schools aren't operating at the moment. And they are living in tents. They are now preparing for winter. They don't know when supplies of food and non-food assistance are coming in, because we're struggling to bring in enough to meet even the basic needs. And yet they are leaving their families, coming in to serve their community, do whatever we can with whatever we have. And, they are the real heroes in all of this. People who, in spite of all that they are going through, are still turning up to serve their people.
The Israeli government have accused some staff members in UNRWA of being involved in the October 7th attacks. How would you respond to that?
No, that's a matter of public record. And of course, immediately these allegations were communicated to our Commissioner General. He took immediate steps to terminate some of the contracts just to protect the interests of the agency. And then a full investigation has been undertaken by the Office of Internal Oversight Services in New York. And the findings of those investigations will be implemented in full.
In Gaza, a fact of life is that you could die at any time. Is that something that crosses your mind?
It would be naive to think that there are no risks. In fact, it's being aware of the risks means that you probably take more care to actually manage how you are there, how you move. You listen to the advice and instructions that you get from management, from security, and you have to always be prepared. But for sure, it's, you know what you're taking on when you go there. The war, it's a small piece of land. It's Gaza is about the size of Louth. So it's, when you have explosions, they're not far away, ever. So you have to always have that awareness. You always have to have that, I guess, self-assurance that you know what you're doing and can manage if things get difficult.
You're talking about self-assurance. I was thinking about you during the week. You're over there and you're helping kids that maybe don't have parents. And by doing that, there's a chance that your kids mightn't have a parent. When they ask you why you're doing this, when your kids ask you why you're doing it, what do you tell them?
It's a good question. I think what's happening there is obviously almost beyond imagination. As a UN staff member, I have an obligation to support and do what I can. I was called by senior management to help last November and have remained on and will remain on. It's not without risks, but at the same time, it's in service of, one of the worst humanitarian situations that the world has experienced. So I believe I have a moral, personal, ethical, whatever you like to describe it, duty to do what I can. And, we have very frank conversations as a family, and, my wife and Hilda and my boys all support what I'm doing. But, you know, I rely on their support as well because, you know, I'm over there on my own. I need to know that I have a stable sort of family situation so that I can focus on what I'm doing. So I wouldn't be here if I didn't, or doing that work if I didn't have that, you know, unequivocal support.
You've worked in Lebanon in the news again today. Irish peacekeepers are on that southern border with Israel. Do you fear for them?
I think the Irish Army has a lot of experience, and I think they will be well prepared for this situation. But of course now, you know, it's an extremely volatile and difficult environment that they are in. They're there to keep a peace. At the moment, there is no peace to keep. So they have to now somehow protect themselves and wait for a time whenever they can resume their duties. But for me, it's somehow an awful parallel to see unfolding in South Lebanon, what we have been seeing in Gaza since October. Lebanon has always, or been for many years, a fragile state, and this is the last thing that they need at this stage, having come through, you know, the economic crisis from 2019, the Beirut port explosion from 2020, COVID like the rest of the world, but in a weakened condition, and then really struggling to try and recover from all of those things. And now, even this evening, we have explosions in southern Beirut. You know, I have colleagues, of course, that I worked with there for 9 years, and they, you know, are right beside these explosions. And I'm messaging them to say, you know, stay safe. And they said, how can we stay safe? And I don't have an answer for that, because the reality is now increasingly in Lebanon, and southern Lebanon especially, there is nowhere safe.
The Taoiseach was in New York this week, pledged his support for the Palestinian people. Do you have any hope that support like that can change things?
I think you always have to have hope. You know, even in the darkest of days, you know, you have to anticipate that one day there will be an end to this violence, there will be a ceasefire, and that in time there will be the grounds for some sort of durable political solution. And that's our job in the meantime, is to turn up to support in any way we can, and to try and create, at least on the ground, some sort of a safer space and more supportive space for these families, and to bear witness to what they're going through. And I think it's important that the world bears witness, because I think these conflicts can, you know, so easily become forgotten because of everything else that's happening in the world. And I think, you know, UNRWA in its role has been, you know, the witness for the situation of Palestinians, you know, in the different fields of operations that I've been in. And I think it's a critical role for us to play.
John, when you're heading back to Gaza this week, we will all be thinking about you.